Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. My name's Alison Stewart and I'm your host for this session of Cut the Crop. And today we have FAR researcher Richard Chynoweth and our technology manager Chris Smith. Hi Richard and Chris. So we're going to be talking about autumn management of multi-year grass seed crops. And we're going to start off with Richard. And this is based on the presentation that you gave at ARIA. So, Richard, which grasses are most impacted by autumn management?
Generally, it's the grasses that require a reasonable tiller development before winter. So it's grasses like tall fescue, cocksfoot, and we don't grow a lot of red fescues, but creeping red fescues and slow establishing crops like that should be in their first year, either autumn or even spring sown, or in multi-year scenarios really need to get growing soon after harvest.
So the other grasses, they are not impacted by this?
Not as impacted. So the likes of ryegrass we can sow right into winter, and that the tillers will still develop and become vernalised or ripe to flower. So generally these other grasses have like a juvenile phase where the tillers have to reach a certain size before they will become able to respond to winter conditions. So all of them have to go through winter before they can then flower in the subsequent spring and summer. And it's generally believed that like tall fescue has a juvenile phase where it must reach a certain number of leaves, of which no one has defined, before it will be able to be vernalised. And yeah, I guess I don't necessarily buy into that argument fully, because we can get some really good tiller and seed head formation from reasonably late autumn sowing in some tall fescue lines. So yeah, I think definitely the likes of ryegrasses and bromes and some of those that have very limited or no vernalisation requirement, that's not autumn management. You can be a whole lot more lax and graze them a whole lot, either way, lax or hard, or sow them late in their first season, etc. Whereas tall fescue, for example, there's some real challenges around having lots of biomass.
Yeah. So talk through what the autumn management practices are then to try and sort of optimise the situation.
So for these let's call them hard to produce lots of seed heads off types of grasses, so tall fescue, cocksfoot, fine fescues, etc. We want early season tiller development, so we want them to have light down into the base early in the autumn, so that because all the buds that are there that are going to produce next year's seed crop are there that summer. And so they're little buds down in the base of each tiller. And we need to remove all the foliage and, it's all the residue really from last year's harvest. And the crop that was growing needs to be trimmed down so there's light down into the base. And that light, along with nitrogen and water, all the things that you need for growth, will encourage that to come away and produce a tiller. It's not just about producing tillers, because if you keep it trimmed, we can produce 4,000 to 5,000 tillers a square metre, but I still only get a couple of hundred with seed heads each and come the following summer. So we need those buds to come through and produce tillers, but we don't want it to be too dense. So continually grazing it or chopping it short is required early in the season. And then we need some way of not reducing, but just putting a cap on the number of tillers. We know if we have ryegrass with 4,000 to 6,000 tillers a square metre, they don't produce many seed heads either. And I think that's a lot of that is around competition between tillers. So we've got to sort of thin them out a wee bit as well as encourage them to grow, which the two things contradict each other, which is not unlike lodging and other management in springtime. We often want to promote growth, but we want to also limit aspects of growth as well.
So if you're a grower, what are the practices then? What do you do and at what time?
So we talked at ARIA a lot about the tall fescue, because that's where we were standing at the time. And the tall fescue there, we had various treatments where we topped them from 15 centimetres and down to 7 centimetres. So like in the trial that was there, that hadn't made much difference, actually, which was semi-surprising. We sort of thought we'd get a difference between those topping regimes. But the trials we've had at Ko-Fi, so at Lincoln, that would actually cut down to 4 and 5 centimetres, have produced a whole lot more seed heads. So I think our 7 centimetres wasn't hard enough. And actually the residue from the topping was enough to shade the buds underneath. So that 7 centimetres wasn't enough to allow light down to get early development. So I think that's really key in that we get some form of hard topping after harvest or really hard grazing, but the livestock will often only graze down to where those stalks are sticking up. They don't want to push their noses down into the real tough stalks that are left. So grazing may or may not be enough. And I don't think it's the crop that you can go and retain residue because that also shades all the buds underneath. But the likes of cocksfoot, we can return the residue as long as we get enough tillers coming through that residue. Then the cocksfoot will be fine. It doesn't require vernalisation per se to achieve flowering. It just needs short days. So as long as it's got enough leaf growing through winter, that will be enough for it to produce seed heads. So there's some contrast between the different species.
And is it also site-specific? I mean, are different growers going to be sort of cutting back at different lengths depending on the site?
I don't know if site will make too much difference. Soil type may make a difference in terms of when and what people can do. And actually, like your ability to irrigate and actually promote growth might determine the timing. There are also differences, but potential differences in growth habits between cultivars. So both tall fescue and cocksfoot, for example, have Mediterranean and continental species. So some are the Mediterranean, some are dormant, so they won't regrow as quickly after harvest, as the continentals want to grow then and have their dormant time in winter. So Mediterraneans are winter active, so they wouldn't be as critical to be topping early because some are dormant. They don't want to necessarily grow straight after harvest. So in the trial at Chertsey, we had Timora, the cultivar Timora, which like you could tell right through until about May that it wasn't growing as quickly as the Quantica next door and the plots next door. So there's some timing things around cultivars potentially.
Yeah. But so if you're a grower, what's the easiest way to work out what you should be doing with your cultivar on your soil type, with or without irrigation? I mean, do they just go and look to see, how many buds are there and whether, they're covered or whatever, how much light is getting into the crop?
I think if growers can see the crown or like see into the drill rows that were there, then they'll know that there's light getting down into the base. If there's trash or leaf or stalk or something and you can't see the very bottom, then there'll be potential issues. But I think if you just wanted some rough rules of thumb, then getting in and topping in January, it would be really important. So as soon as you can after harvest, getting it nice and short and then trying to remove as much of that trash through grazing as possible. Irrigation through that phase could be quite important, depending on rainfall, evapotranspiration, etc., and having enough nitrogen to allow those buds to actually grow away also, because in that trash and the topping and the residue that's been removed, you've removed a lot of carbohydrate as well. So the crop is actually struggling. It'll have a resource that's either at or close to ground level, but that's nowhere near as much as in the big stems and internodes. So getting in and cutting it short, trying to remove that trash if you can, potentially through grazing animals, and not leaving it on the surface. Yeah.
So you've done all of that. Is that going to guarantee you that that's then going to result in really good seed heads?
Not necessarily, because it could end up being too thick. So you can have lots and lots of little buds that produce lots of tillers, and then they could outcompete each other, or compete with each other, and they will themselves most likely need a certain amount of carbohydrate or energy to actually be able to produce a seed head. And if they're too busy competing with each other, then there's the option that they may just stay vegetative for the season. So there's the light environment early that's needed for their release, but then there might need to be scenarios where people look at inter-row spraying and say March, maybe into April, to thin the crop out to allow those tillers that are there to actually have enough space and enough light resource to actually come through and produce seed heads. So there's the fact we've got to get them growing and get them big to be able to respond to the cool of winter. And then there's also, do they have enough resource to actually be able to produce a seed head? But like you and I standing at the bottom of a mountain, have we got enough energy? Have we eaten enough breakfast to be able to climb to the top? Or are we just going to go, well, maybe not today? And then they'll sit and wait for another 12 months. So I think there's some energy requirements in there as well that's not at all well defined for any of these species. But we know the same thing happens in ryegrass. When you have 4,000 to 5,000 tillers a square metre, you don't get a good seed crop. It's so that's like planting 15 to 18 kilos of ryegrass seed. We get a better response when we plant 6 to 8 kilos of ryegrass seed. So the density has something to do with it, and it's not just vernalisation and day length.
What that says is that there's still opportunity to increase the yield.
Yeah, I think so. A lot it's really common now for a number of cultivars to produce really well in the first season, say 1,500 kilos of seed, and then they struggle to produce 500 kilos in the second. So there's lots of opportunities in that space, in that second and third year space to, I don't know. Well, I think we're being way too kind on them. Get stuck into them and probably increase, opportunities to increase in that second and third year phase.
Okay, so we've done some research. It's highlighted, hypotheses that you've developed, and you've got ideas of what could work and what couldn't work. So what are our plans then to try and sort of firm up on potentially giving, stronger recommendations? Yes,
I'm still talking to some growers that after the ARIA field day, which have got ideas. I really want to try a burning treatment this year, because that would remove all that foliage and basically reset the clock in terms of where it would go. I don't know if that would be a large scale treatment that could happen on farm, but also need to get in and try some inter-row spraying on the angles that actually take plants out and bits and pieces like that, try and thin some areas out. So the plan to repeat some of the topping height work, incorporate potentially a burning treatment if we can, depends on what the season does and fire restrictions and those sort of things. Incorporate a bit more inter-row spraying and potentially a couple of different closing dates. So looking at maybe closing in May, which was some of the feedback from some of the growers, and pushing that through into June and July as well, which is what we actually did in the trials at Chertsey. So there's multiple different angles there to try and tease out those hypotheses, but also want to start tagging some tillers and actually see whether it is the autumn emerging tillers that are producing the seed heads. I'm still not fully confident on some of the species on that either.
Okay, so actually still quite a little bit of work to do.
I think there's lots of work to do, because they actually need proof that the first emerging tillers are producing the seed heads. That's not,
So it's very much a sort of watch this space.
Especially in the tall fescue, yes.
Yeah. Okay, good, excellent. So let's move on to Chris. You're here to talk about autumn irrigation management and moisture probes. Yes. So when's the best time to sort of install some moisture monitoring systems?
Ideally, sort of in the autumn, as soon as the crop's sown, and sooner after the crop's sown, the more useful data you'll get out of it. You'll see the crop actively growing over the top of the probe. The thing is, when you install the probe, there's quite a lot of disturbance of the soil. So if this crop's smaller, it's got more chance to recover from that and carry on growing. And then once you've got it in there, you can actually sort of see it actively growing, and you can see if there's any limiting factors. And also a lot of these systems and probes you buy, you're paying an annual fee, so there's no point in keeping it in your shed because you're paying for it already. So you might as well actually utilize it and get some useful information out of it while it's going. And you can see the groups developing and going further down, and then you can adjust your moisture probe accordingly. And like I say, if you can see any limitations, you can actually react to them and actually make a decision on it if you know what's going on.
So obviously there's lots of different moisture probes out there. So, pros and cons, and what are they, and how can they be used most effectively? Yeah,
there's numerous different types, but it's basically the number of sensors the probe has is quite useful. So a lot of people that have just a single level probe, and they'll put it in at, say, 10 or 20 centimetres. When you do that, you just got to be wary that if you put it in too shallow, that it'll be reacting too much to the weather, because obviously it'll be drying out too much. And if you put it in too deep, you won't actually be able to pick up what's happening. It'll be too late. By the time the roots get down to it, you actually won't be monitoring to the actual right depth. And if you only got one sensor, you don't know what's happened below that. So I always try and get something that's more than one sensor. Even if it's a single sensor, still put two of them in, say maybe one at 10 and one at 30 centimetres. Another type of probe is one where you have a big long, say 3 metre long tape, which will run from 10 centimetres down to 40 centimetres. That's obviously quite a big channel you're making to actually get that in. So you want to get that in early. And then once that's in, that'll give you an average over that 10 to 40 centimetre depth. They're really good once the crop's actually developed down that far. But one thing to be wary of with those is it'll be telling you the moisture within the top 40, and your roots might not be down that far, so you might actually think you've got more moisture available than you have. So that's something to be very aware of. But those sensors, like the Aquaflexes, are really good because they're measuring a lot more soil than the individual sensors. They might only be looking at sort of 5 or 10 centimetres. These things are looking like about 6 litres of soil all the time, so they're giving you a really good average. But just be wary that you might not be actually rooting down to that point. And then the third type is a multi-level sensor. So that's they're mainly 10, 20, 30, 40, and then can go down to 60 or 90 centimetres. And what's good about those is all sensors are telling you the temperature and the moisture at those different depths. But those ones, you can actually adjust them as the crop grows. You can actually see how far through the profile the actual sort of moisture the roots are going. And you can adjust your sensors, how many you're actually including in your moisture trace, so your bucket can fill. And so you're actually sort of looking exactly what's going on in your root zone. And also you can see what's happening beyond the root zone. So if you do get a big rain or irrigation event, you can see how far through the profile it's gone, and whether it's taking nutrients and moisture too far below the roots, etc., and any potential issues with those. So those are the three main types. Sort of pricing wise, there's sort of quite a bit of difference, but then there's sort of different uses for each one. So it depends what you're looking for, really.
And obviously, presumably, the number depends on how much variability you think you've got in your paddock. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. If you're only going to put one in, put it in the most representative part of the paddock as well. And if you've got several, if you've scanned your soil for different soil types, or you've got different soil types, it's recommended to put one in each of the soil types if possible. Then if you can't afford that, obviously there's got quite a big financial implication of that. Just put it in the most representative area, I recommend, and don't put them under fence lines. People always think, oh, I'll put it under the fence line and I can leave it there for forever and never have to move it. But then it's not representing what's actually happening with the growing crop above, and it's just not reflecting what's actually happening in the paddock.
So if you're a grower and you've got your moisture sensors in there, what are the key references that you're looking for that prompt you to then make a decision to make a management change?
So you're looking basically when the probe's put in, it's probably because a lot of these are capacitance probes, so they're only showing you a trend. So you're better off getting somebody to install it who knows what they're doing, and they can adjust it to the soil type, so they make sure it's set up correctly for the right soil type. And then they can set up your field capacity, and they can set up what the rooting zone is, how many of the sensors, if there are multi-sensor probes, how many of them they should be using initially. And then they'll actually set up your stress point as well, so the point at which sort of your crop can still take moisture below stress point, but it's not readily available, so it starts taking energy out of the crop to take moisture below that level. So they'll set up all those parameters for you. So you're better off sort of getting that done early as possible. And if you're looking at the probes as well on your display, there's many different displays and things. We've actually got a FAR trial going on at the moment where we've got lots of different moisture probes in with lots of different displays. I sort of recommend having the display set to 14 to 21 days. That way you can actually see what's actually happening trend-wise, whether the moisture is going down, etc. So you can look at what's happening sort of over that time period, rather than if you have the time period too short, you're only just seeing like straight lines going across with no detail on them.
Yeah.
So the moisture trace is probably the most critical thing. Just seeing where that is, how far below the sort of field capacity, and once you've got that set up, you pretty much just keep an eye on it, make sure it doesn't get too low. Obviously, there's repercussions of letting it go too low with sort of an impact on growth, etc. And likewise, just keep an eye on the forecast if you are going to irrigate, etc., because you might have implications of actually putting too much and going above field capacity, because anything above field capacity is drainage, and drainage has got sort of leaching issues and potential.
I'm always interested with these technology things around return on investment, because they all sound wonderful and they can all do certain things, but from the perspective of how much money that the grower has to invest in the technology and the benefit that they get, have you got any nice examples that illustrate a good return on investment?
Well, the cost of putting moisture on is like $2 to $2.50 a millimetre. So if you can actually save on that, the probes cost generally about $3,000 installed, and then you'll have an ongoing subscription fee, which might be $300 or $100, etc. a year. It depends on the probe. So the probes will last 10 plus years. It's the telemetry units that don't last that long. So you can get a lot of people saying on high value crops, you can pay for it in the first year quite easily, especially on a very dry year as well, and be able to maximise the moisture in the soil and look at your forecasts and not water. It's having confidence in what we find is people in the first year carry on irrigating regardless. And then after they realise what the probe's actually working and actually showing what's happening, then they take confidence in it, and then they do actually start making bigger savings when they actually sort of
it comes back to that FAR focus that we did, having the confidence to cut back when we were talking about nitrogen applications. It's the same with anything.
Absolutely.
It's the same with fungicides, and it's the same with fertilizers, and it's the same with water. Do you understand enough about how your system is operating so that you only have to put these inputs in when you absolutely need them?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've had people before ring me up saying there's something wrong with the moisture probe because every time I irrigate, it's spiking at each of the different sensor levels. It's saying that's because you're putting too much moisture on it, it's going down. Yeah. Just try cutting back, have confidence in it, see how far through the profile it's going, how far through the profile your roots are, and then you can match the two, make sure you're not putting too much on, but just have the confidence in believing what you've actually purchased. And as people get more and more confidence, and then they actually think, actually, I could buy another one next year, and they gradually build it up. Another thing is you don't have to buy a complete sort of network at once. You can actually build up these things over years and put them in the most sort of the crops with the highest payback as well. The crops that are longest in the ground as well is probably the most useful.
So what kind of adoption and uptake have we got within our growers with things like this? There's quite a lot of people, because you need them for a lot of the audits, for a lot of consents and compliance. You need to be able to prove while you're irrigating, etc. And especially, I'd say most people have got them. We've got a lot of interest, like I say, in this probe trial we've got going at the moment. But that's more about we've got lots of different companies involved, but a lot of them using the same sensors, but they've got different displays. So it's understanding the display that works for you, the one you can actually see and say, okay, I understand that I'm near soil, I've got a soil moisture deficit of say 15 mils, and what that means, the implication of it, and being able to look at the graph and be able to make a decision off it. Some of them is lots of lines, and people say, well, I don't know what it means, and they carry on watering regardless. So it's understanding what you've got there. It's actually quite a nice sort of like contrast you're talking about, because you're talking about technology, like tools being able to help growers inform them about decisions, and then you're talking, Richard, about actually looking and seeing what your plant is doing. So like there's the biology, understanding the biology and understanding the technology. and you need both in order to be able to optimize your yields.
Yeah, and you still need a spade to go out there and dig yourself and just look and make sure you're happy with what your probe's showing you. And I always recommend putting a rain gauge on there as well. So if you do get an irrigation or rain event, you can say, okay, well, I had 15 mils and that's how much it responded and that's how much the crop used. But get out there with a spade as well. You can a spade. If a lot of people in the first season as well, they'll take a spade round and just say, well, the spade's saying this and the probe's saying that, and they're just matching it in their head.
Well, yeah, because you've used the spade for so many years and you trust the spade.
Absolutely, yeah. It doesn't break down, yeah.
Okay, thanks. So, Richard, any final comments from you? Any little bit gems of wisdom?
No, I'd just back up what Chris is saying with a lot of the irrigation work. Like we've got a irrigation trial in tall fescue this year, and it's got a couple of treatments in there where we've been monitoring soil moisture and a lot of, well, we don't believe at the moment we will have impacted on seed yield. Obviously, we'll know when we harvest it. There's treatments there that have had, well, a half irrigation is probably going to, well, it is underwater stress. But there's a treatment where we've tried to keep it above a 60 millimetre deficit, and that's applied about 2/3 of the water of replacing ET, and at the moment doesn't appear to have had any water stress. And I would expect that to probably have, by the end of the season, we might have been saving $250, $300 a hectare while maximising seed yield. So that would be somewhere in the vicinity of 150 millimetres of water, and that'll be rainfall that we've captured through the springtime. Like we've had frequent rainfalls this year, and in the fully irrigated plots have often been close to field capacity when that rainfall's occurred. But from the autumn management side of it, like it's really important to understand the rooting depth part of it, and that could also be impacted by other critters like grass grub. Yeah. So it's important to factor that one in when you're thinking about irrigation and trying to promote growth as well. So
I mean, it's multidimensional, isn't it? Everything interacts with everything else. Yeah. Life is not simple if you're an arable farmer.
No, but like, yeah, in terms of the autumn management and being able to capture that rainfall, like some of that stuff, we need to be considering it, and that's free water at this time of the year.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much, Richard and Chris.
Thank you.
And thank you, listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.